Right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Saying with Straker Translations. I have with me today Marin Straker. She is the Chief Operating Officer of Straker. Marin, how are you today?
Good, thanks, Gianluca. Really good.
Yeah, cool. Great to hear. So, obviously, we've known each other for over 5 years now, which is a
Yeah.
little crazy to say because I feel like I just met you in Barcelona for the first time a few weeks ago. But for those of you who don't know you, can you kind of introduce yourself, your role at Straker, and maybe even a little bit about the company?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm. Company was founded originally in 1999 by my husband Grant and I. Not technically, we weren't married then. In fact, we were. You could have said it was up in the air. We'd only known each other for 6 weeks, so it could have gone either way. So the company's been around for a while. I've been through its incarnations of purely language translation focus, when we did web content management in a multilingual capacity, and we sold software. That was like pre-cloud days as well. To coming through into us determining we would pivot into the services provision using tech instead. So that was about 2011 that we made that real cool change. My role is really, I kind of look after three parts of the business. The product team sit under us for what we're going to build and how we're going to do it. The production team, so for us, that's all of our project managers, DTP, in-house translators, vendor management, that side of things. And then the other part that is passed to me is the integration side. So when we buy companies, and we've bought 9 to date, then that comes across for us to work out how we're going to bring them together so we can work together more effectively.
Yeah, I want to go back kind of to the early days of Straker and even maybe pre-Straker. What was your background before Straker, and what made you, after 6 weeks of knowing Grant, say, "Yeah, let's start a company together"?
Yeah, so my background prior to Straker, I did a management degree and majoring in HR and organisational behaviour, which is highly ironic because I am not the HR person, if ever there was. But I guess what I always knew is I wanted to be in business. I grew up on a farm in New Zealand, on a beef farm. I guess I always knew what it was like to be in control of your own destiny to a certain extent from my family. So I always knew I wanted to own my own thing. I started out some time in the insurance industry and then the pharmaceutical industry. And so I was working in the pharmaceutical sector when I met Grant. So kind of I helped set up the company, all the basics and that sort of thing initially. And then about 3 months into it, decided that I would take my job in my perfectly good company car, which for my dad was kind of like the epitome of having achieved the right things in life, to go off and work in this web space, right, where, it was unknown. It was early days, .com stuff, just pre.com stuff. But kind of how we were founded is Grant actually taught himself to code on the side, went off to do a course, an Adobe Cold Fusion course at that time, knew more than the instructor. And so the instructors said, "Hey, could you do some contract work for us with this client?" So that's kind of how we went, "Oh, actually, maybe I'm quite good at this stuff." So I guess really what happened is I'm pretty good. I guess I didn't know whether I was good at tech or not. I just naturally had that affinity. And I guess my organisation side of things is what I added initially to the business. I used to run the project management side then when we were in that tech space. And I guess we just grew and evolved over time.
Yeah. What brought on, the switch to translations?
Yeah.
You're in kind of the web space.
Yeah.
And I say that, on our side of the business and the sales side, we always tell this story to kind of validate, hey, we're bringing technology and translation kind of together. How did that actually come about?
Yeah. So I think in 2010 we started playing with enabling web translations better. right? Just as what could we do? Could we do anything in that space? And at that time, we had a client in the US, and they were running our software because we sold our software to corporates and governments and educational institutions, pretty much in the UK, US, NZ, and Australia. And one of those clients in the US wanted to translate their website into Spanish and Arabic. And they talked to us about it, and we were like, "Oh, yeah, this, I don't know anything about that. That's not really our gig." And so they actually asked us a couple of times. They were quite persistent. And then when we had a look at it, at that time, the market was worth 25 billion USD a year, and we were in the 1 billion tool space. And we're like looking across the fence at the 24 billion service delivery space, thinking, hold on a minute. And at the same time, it really was at the start of machine translation. And I think we looked at it purely from a technical point. We saw that machines and humans together would be what customers would demand, and that would be the future. And so we went, okay, I think we'll give this a go. So that's pretty much what we did. I mean, we had, I remember the first job that I got involved with, I just had our third child. I was meant to have 6 months off. I hadn't had 6 months off with any of these kids. And I thought, okay, yep, but I got about 3 months in, and we had a job out of Australia. And look, we could do that in, I don't know, probably 3 days now, not even if we had to. But it took us about 3 weeks, and it turned into a real disaster in effect. And what happened was Grant sat on one side of our dining table and I sat on the other, and it was Spanish, Latin American Spanish that we needed. And I'd say to him, I need you to fix this, and he'd code something, and then I'd release it, and then I'd say to the translator, right, we're good now, right? And so that was actually my first introduction pretty much to the language space. I came in to fix a problem. And that particular client said to me something that I'll never forget in my life. And she said, do you swear on the life of your baby that you will have this done? Right? Now, our middle son's got a disability, so I don't muck around with the good and the bad in life. Like, I know what life's like. And I actually got up and I walked away from our table. So that's pre-video calls, right? That wasn't a video call at that time. It was just an audio call. And fair dues to Grant, he sat at the table and he continued to talk to that client. And I wasn't rude. I just got up and walked away and went, there's some stuff here that I probably don't go down. But when I look back at that, that was the early forming of what we did. And we had to learn a lot of lessons in the process around this. So we learned a lot, right? But I'm not up for repeating that exercise ever again. To be fair, I'm not going to have any more children, so I'm probably safe on that particular scenario. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that certainly puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
Even for those of us who don't have kids yet.
Yeah.
So then, what would you say to anybody? Kind of, what advice would you give to somebody who kind of wants to start their entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah.
Now, what are we, almost 20 years later?
Yeah. Well, we are. Ugh,
yeah. What can you look back on and say, oh, I wish I knew that, or I wish I'd done this differently?
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing is, I think there's 2 stages in your life. There's the life pre-kids and there's the life with kids, right? So when you go, like for us, we went into that journey initially without kids, right? And so there's a lot more of you that you can give, and there's a lot more that you can put on the line, right? You don't have much generally earlier in your life. So when you're risking it all, that's a part of it. So I think it's easier to do some of that stuff when you're younger and you don't miss what you don't have to a certain extent, right? And then as it gets older and you've got kids and you've got everything else to balance, then it becomes harder. But what I would say for us, and where I think our true success lies in, is both Grant and I never believe anything is impossible, right? 100%. So many people told us, especially with the switch into languages, language translation, in the first early days, We had translators that thought we were lunatics, right? And we're like, well, we think it'll work together. It's not really about is it an art or a science. It's really actually about what is the customer going to demand and where is the market going to go. And what we could see was more and more content was coming out. The life cycle of that content was shorter. It wasn't so much printed books and publications that was your booklet for the year or for the season or whatever. So much more of it was digital, that this was the way it was going to go. So for us, probably in the early years, and Grant has said this before, if we went to a conference, and I remember going to Gala and sitting next to a very nice Quebecois translator whose name was Stefan, and he earbashed me all night through this dinner when we were in Istanbul. So it's like, I don't know, it's probably 2012 or 13 or something. All night telling me how wrong I was, all night how there was no way that there was a place for machines and humans, and he wasn't even interested. Now, he was 49, right? Now, he'd still fair quantum of his translation career to be had. And then a couple of years later, we went back to Gala in New York, and going in and out of all the sessions on how do you work with machine translation was a man called Stefan, right? And I thought, yep, I think sometimes the real benefit of going down this path is if you don't know it, you're not bothered by it, right? So we didn't come with any preconceived views of what is or isn't possible. We just decided we were going to do it. Let's just get stuck in with it. And so I think markets and what other people have to say to you can certainly narrow your vision. But if you're really focused on what you believe is possible, then we just take no notice of that. We just carried on. Many people, even because we are a husband and wife structure, and there's a couple of notable issues with that in this particular industry. There was a lot of things around that, even around us listing, concerns about the fact that we were a couple, etc. And there's two ways to look at that. Some people look at me as if I'm the token wife involved in the business, and that still does happen. There are some people that don't think I necessarily do a full job. And that is life, because in some businesses and teams, that's how it works. And others who looked at us and saw that as a risk profile. But Grant and I do completely different parts of the business, and he focuses on stuff that he's awesome at, right? He pushes the envelope out on stuff. He's got that sales hat on. I've got the how do we make it work hat on, right? So we try, I guess we work well together. And that's the other thing. I think if you can work well with someone together and you're on an entrepreneurial journey, that is such a benefit in many cases. We, when we went through the IPO and the listing process, that was pretty horrific, as in the quantum of work, and you're still trying to run a business and do all the things you need to do at the same time. I honestly don't think if we hadn't been in it together that it would have been as easy, as achievable as it was, because we were both solely focused on that. So everything in your world just moved sideways, including our kids went a few different directions as well, but they're a little bit used to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody in the company who would ever accuse you of not working hard enough. I think maybe the opposite could be true, that you work.
Yeah, I think it's, and I don't think anyone in our business has thought that, but certainly outsiders, investors, people making decisions, and I get that because they've probably seen it before, right?
Yeah. I want to take us kind of, I guess, backwards and forwards again. So before pre-IPO. You're building this company from New Zealand. When you were looking at, okay, we think we need to expand, we probably need to have somewhat of a global presence.
Yeah.
How did you go about that process? And then in choosing where certain office locations, may or may not have ended up, what did you look at when evaluating, different places?
So I think one of the benefits was because we had been selling globally, we already, from a software point of view, we already had a presence in Ireland, and with David, our Chief Revenue Officer over there, and a couple of staff over there. So we were already global in those two markets effectively. What we did after that was just make ourselves appear global in many markets, Australia, Canada, US, whatever. And we utilize Google and Google AdWords to enable us to do that. We appeared to have local numbers, we did all of that stuff. But what we actually did in the early days was, we did a lot of online chat stuff. So we'd have a New Zealand team working through the day, and then Grant and I pretty much covered us from about 5:30, 6 o'clock until about 9 p.m. until the Irish couple of people in Ireland popped up and took over. So we would quote, we would process jobs, we would do all that sort of thing. Well, I'd process jobs. He didn't do so much that, to be fair. And then what we did was I think the real irony to this is Ireland's a great place, but it gets quite cold in winter. And we had some team members that we wanted to send up there, and I found it quite interesting, because if it had been me straight out of uni, I'd have been gone, right? Like, I'm young, unattached, no real ties. If someone had said, do you want to go and work in Ireland for 3 months, I'd have had my bag packed that night and been gone, right? But we worked out it's not actually quite the way it was, and I think that's a generational change. I think travel was so easy now and affordable that it became more of an expectation. Well, of course I'll do that, but I'll do it on my terms. So we had a few problems getting people to go to Ireland at a couple of times for a longer stint. And then we sat there and looked at it and said, well, where do we want an office in Europe? And where is it that there is a good quantum of language speakers? Where are, language degrees? Where are other localization companies? And so we had a few shortlists. We had Italy, we had Spain, David had Poland. I was like, mate, it's colder in Poland in the winter than it is in Ireland. So I'm not sure if that's helping my cause. But the other side is we decided we wanted to have offices where people would like to go, right? And so Barcelona came out as our pick for that spot. And it was a little different, because doing business in New Zealand, or how we structure things in New Zealand, is quite different to Spain. So when we got there, we knew a great guy who had been in the language space, who put us onto a guy that was both an accountant and a lawyer to help us set it up. We set it up, and we set it up basically within 3 weeks. Grant flew up, interviewed some potential project managers, and we flew 3 of them down. So that all happened inside of 3 weeks. And we trained them up. They were here for about 3 or 4 weeks, and that was the start of our Barcelona office, right? And it's an interesting market, because one of the advisor had said to me, but you need a manager. I said, a manager to do what, right? They're just going to be, we've got a team lead to look after the project managers, but what's the manager going to do? Well, no, you're in Spain, you need a manager. I'm like, but for 90% of the time, they're not going to have anything to do. So that's not how we work. And then also he said, and they have to have an office. I was like, and I just sit in the open plan, right? And we're very flat structured around a lot of that stuff anyway. And I was like, can't see that happening, really. So getting used to some of those things were challenging. But I think culturally, we have a really good, we have a lot of fun with the Spanish team. So from that sense, I think that's been a really great fit for us. Some of the employment law structures are completely different. So it's a whole different universe to, I probably put the US as too far to the right, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Ireland's probably in the middle, and then there's some challenging employment things to deal with in Spain, right? And in, some of the European markets that are very strongly towards the left. So it can take a bit to get your head around how you do things and, the way it works in those markets. But fundamentally, our main mix was, having not managed to get that many people keen to go to Killarney, we wanted to have somewhere warm and good fun to go.
Yeah, it's maybe not a surprise then that I think Spain has the majority of our employees. They have, or not the majority, but the largest presence for us.
The largest presence outside of New Zealand, I think, probably now. Yeah.
That's likely not a coincidence with it being not a terrible place to live.
Yeah, I know, precisely. Yeah.
So then what for you and Grant was such a strong motivator to keep the company kind of headquartered and really based out
New
of New
Zealand.
Zealand? Was
Yeah.
there ever any pressure either from investors or even just kind
Yeah.
of from external
Yeah.
messaging to say, hey, move it to Europe fully, or move it to the US or move it elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's not natural to have a language company based out of New Zealand. That's the first thing I would say. People don't expect it. We don't value languages in New Zealand, and although we have 3 national languages, technically we have Te Reo, English, and Sign Language. They are our specified national languages. We don't. Unlike Ireland, who are doing it way better than us for a similar population base, we don't require Te Reo to be compulsory in schools, which I think is a real shame. And so we also don't value our own languages, and we don't value kids learning languages, which is a real shame. Whereas in Europe, it's a given, right? Let's be honest, you're going to learn your language and English and potentially, another. And there's a lot to be said for that, for opportunities in life and work and the cultural enrichment that goes with that. But from New Zealand, I think the tyranny of distance used to be really difficult for us from New Zealand. But I guess we always said, and I mean, you'll know this, GL anyway, and from Dave, the same thing with Dave. Cameras on, right? So you might be anywhere else, but we've always, from the early days, from using Skype to whatever we used at the time, Slack and Google Meet now. It's always cameras on, right? Yes, we might be in different places. So from that point of view, we were probably reasonably well equipped for COVID, right? Because we were used to working in opposite time zones, etc., and having to cross that. Was there pressure for us to not be a New Zealand company? There are a couple of times it'd be fair to say, I think, that Grant and I thought we should probably be based in the US or Europe as a family to do this. But what we really always wanted to do was build a big New Zealand company, right? That was our ultimate goal. We believe that in New Zealand, it's not uncommon to build a large tech company and then to sell out when you get to that 50, 60 million revenue mark, and fair dues. Like, I don't knock anybody who has sold out, because it's not an easy game to do. But we wanted to say, if we want to change the future of what we have as a country and where our employment opportunities are for our children, we need tech companies to build themselves out in New Zealand and to stay here. So during the IPO process, there was, because we listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, not the New Zealand one, there were varying conversations in a reasonable tax bill to determine, would we have to become an Australian head office company? And we didn't want to do that. And it was really about saying, would we be disadvantaging our shareholders if we weren't? And we had the tax advice. To be honest, I'm not sure why I had to pay for that. We can't have been the only New Zealand company that had been down that path. I personally think that should have been an answer that should have been easily got. But it was determined that we could stay where we were, and there was no disadvantage to shareholders either in New Zealand or Australia if we did that. It is a challenge to build a big company from New Zealand in a space where there are not many other people playing in that space, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we've talked kind of about the challenges, but what are the advantages? Is there an advantage to keeping it in New Zealand? Is there something inherently, beneficial in the business climate, or maybe in?
Yeah. From a business climate point of view, no, I don't think there's anything necessarily greatly beneficial here to us that isn't in some other markets. I think part of our DNA is, one of our values has been, we solve hard problems that others can't, right? And part of me says that's a lot of what's come from where we've come from, because we don't have this traditional role structure view. Like, if there's a problem, you just get stuck in and sort it. We're not hung up on titles or job descriptions or anything like that. So I think culturally, enabling ourselves to take the best parts of, I guess, the way we work as Kiwis and try and expand that out across the team has some merit and some benefit to us. But really now, what we learned through COVID as well is, Grant and I would have done 3 or 4 trips to Europe a year, probably. I haven't been since December 2019, right? We've survived. But we will be moving back that way. I think Grant's done 2 trips to the States this year. I've done 1. But we'll move back to some of those markets, and the same thing with people coming around about, but it'll never be to the level that it was before. And I think we've worked better systems in places, and there's still a lot more to do there. I'm on a Slack mission at the moment, having gone to a Slack presentation a while ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I think I scared the HR team, the people and culture team, silly when I came back with a few things. But as an organisation, you grow and you put stuff in, and things come in from the side, and they don't always connect. But I'm standing here saying there's a lot more we can do to have our involvement, our engagement better, but dump a whole lot of stuff around the peripheral, and a lot of smarter ways we can do it through centralised tools like Slack or Teams, right? So, there's lots of good stuff, and we don't have to be on planes all the time, and having to deal with it that way. 100% though, I don't knock. We get huge benefit of spending time in market with people in our teams. I think you learn who people are more, and you build a better level of engagement. So we do lose a little bit of stuff as we go when we don't do this stuff, but I think it's just trying to find a balance on that process.
Yeah, definitely. I want to take us kind of into the acquisition territory.
Yep.
Obviously, we've had 9 acquisitions to date. I've been here for 8 of them. What are the challenges that we face through various acquisitions, and what are kind of like the lessons you've learned that when companies are looking to acquire other companies or merge, that you might be able to kind of
acquisitions. So the first thing I'd say about acquisitions is you can never find out everything you want to know when you're doing the DD phase, right? So it's very much about the numbers and what the founders and owners share with you. Because at any stage, if you are a founder, you're wanting to list your company, you're not going to go out and say to your whole team, "Hey, by the way, I'm out of here. I've had enough of this. I'm off," right? I'm looking for someone else to do it. There might be a couple of people that know that that's your, plan, the necessary people. So what normally happens is, Grant and Steve, who does our mergers and acquisition side of things, they work through things with companies, and at a certain point, we start getting the DD information. We start being able to understand a bit more about the business and people and customers and how they work, but we can never find out truly what you need to know. And so there's always some surprises. And once it's acquired, then it's kind of handed over to me to work out how do we make them part of our team. So, we've had a value of one team, one platform, and that was really good till we bought a company with a platform, right? And then it's like, okay, one team, 2 platforms. How does that work? But it's all about, I think, it's change, right? And change is confronting to people. And so it doesn't matter who you are in a company that we acquire. I 100% recognise that people go, "Oh, what's this going to mean for me?" And in many cases, we don't know what it means to start with. We don't have enough understanding of how they work or what they do, or what the client needs are to work, a lot of the stuff out. What we know is that we get leverage and advantage by bringing people onto the one platform. And so doing that and trying to work out the fastest and easiest way to do that is key. Now, it doesn't always work, right? In terms of we were ready, we purchased Edest in Belgium in 31st of December. Technically, the finance team and the production team, we're ready to make that move as of 1 July, but we're changing our infrastructure in Europe to be based in Europe. So we've had to say, well, that's really good, but actually it's going to wait a few months. So there can be things like that. You can do, all manner of things. I think the key is that we find, and I think the thing that can't be underestimated, in every business, a lot of knowledge sits often with a founder. And then in every business, we often find people who just need to be liberated a bit to do a better job, right? Have some great skills and capabilities. And I can think of a few people like that we've in businesses we've acquired we've recognised the value and the skill set they've got. And that is about us as an underlying business. We're not sitting here saying that everything that Straker does is right, and we don't necessarily say that what someone we've acquired is doing is wrong. What we're trying to do is say, how do we bring it together so all of it goes up and we continue to grow and provide a better offering for our client on the journey.
Yeah, definitely. I want to finish us off here as we're coming up on time with one final question. And if we bring it back to, 10, 12 years ago, you and Grant kind of entered into the translation space because you saw kind of the advent of machines and humans being able to work together, and that really providing a ton of value ultimately to clients. Where do you see the future of the translation industry in the next kind of, even 3 to 5 or 10 years?
Yeah. Content connections and everything coming via API is strongly, absolutely the future. I think too the use of almost a concept of near enough is good enough, I think will become more pervasive across clients as they still continue to struggle with, with the budgets and what they can do and how much content needs to be changed. In reality, the true proxy of quality is not about how many steps you've put it through, but it's about your client's acceptance of it, right? So that's still a mindset change. And it's not to say for what we do that we don't provide the full remit. It's just sometimes clients need to step back a little bit and think about it and go, okay, if I really want to do this, do I need to do it that way, right? I think the way in which we get content is definitely, such a strong focus in that ability to automate and return stuff. Machines and humans will absolutely continue to work together. I don't see machines completely taking over at all. But I do see that, and that helps us. If the volume of content is up and you can use machines to do the heavy lifting and we can get things smarter as we go, that's a benefit to everybody, right? But it is a change in how translators work. So it is fundamentally a change in getting used to the fact that it is more an editing structure than a straight translation skill set.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Maren, for taking the time. I want to remind everybody you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and we usually broadcast these onto Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, Maren, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, thanks. Bye.